35th episode of BDA Baby today. I was just informed. So exciting. A really popular topic that we are going to be covering today, which is sex, your sex life post-baby. We got a ton of questions. This is a conversation that we actually had with Dr. Cassidy at the beginning of the year when I first started doing these episodes of BDA Baby, and it was so heavily watched, and so many questions were submitted that we didn't get to, so her and I decided that we were going to try and do this again. Now we're doing it again, and had so many amazing questions by you guys just asking really great questions about sex life post-baby, how to talk about those things, the partner relationship, intimacy. So we're going to talk about all of those things with Dr. Cassidy today. And again, I'm going to try to get as many questions as possible. There were also a lot of pelvic floor questions, which we've done an episode on pelvic floor. I'm happy to do another episode on pelvic floor since that's such a big topic that you guys asked about. But if some of the things are not covered in today's episode, I also encourage you to watch the first episode we did with Dr. Cassidy, which is on my page. And I will post a repost link for that as well. So let's just go right into it with Dr. Cassidy. We're going to talk a little bit about sex post-baby. I know she's home with no kids. Hi.
Hi.
How are you again?
I'm so good. I'm so glad we're doing this again. My fur baby, all my other babies are out of the house, but this guy wants to be right here.
Oh, so sweet. I love that. I know I saw your post and you're like, it's so nice to be in the house with no kids. I'm like, I know, I'm sure, especially with summer, all the kids are back home again. So it's a little bit, it'll be a nice little refresh to have everybody out of the house for you.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. It's this without the structure of school, and they're just all home looking at me like,
what are we going to do?
I have a 9-year-old. Yeah. I have a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and my baby's almost 1. And so, it's just like, I have my feet in postpartum land, and my daughter's like a pre-tween, and I sometimes feel like I'm doing the splits between all these different needs and stages. But
it is wild. It's crazy that both of our babies are about to be 1. It's such a wild and crazy time. I just saw my mom is here, so hello, mother. I'm actually so excited. I know you and I have been talking back and forth just since we first did our BDA Baby episode earlier this year, just about doing this again, because when we originally did it, there was such a flood of questions about this topic, which is sex after baby, intimacy with your partner, and even, taking the post-baby part aside, this is such a big topic in general, and then add being postpartum to it, and it makes it even more interesting. So we again got so many questions that I just want to launch right into it. But first, before we do that, I kind of want to just get a little bit of information from you to talk to people about why this is such a big topic that I think we're talking more about openly, but it is such a kind of hush-hush topic to be talking about sex after baby.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's something that is such an important part of a partner relationship. And in so many ways, we hope that after we become a parent and have that sort of shared role with our partner, that it's just going to bring us closer. And then you have a baby and they hand you the baby and reality hits. And unfortunately, so much preparation goes into the birth, right? And you're getting the nursery ready, and you're, preparing for birth, and then postpartum hits. And there are so many reasons why intimacy, which is such an important part of partner relationships, is impacted after your baby is born. And so, we can just name a few of these like libido blocks, and libido being the desire to have sex and be intimate with your partner. You're sleep deprived. You just went through, if you're the birthing partner, you just are maybe still healing. Mm-hmm. You might not recognize your body anymore. You are navigating all of the identity shifts. And when you're a parent, you might not feel like a sexual being anymore, mm-hmm. for so many reasons. And maybe one of you has really low libido. Maybe if you are breastfeeding, that definitely impacts libido. It can impact, you can make sex actually quite painful. It's your body's way of like having sort of like birth control. It's like, you just had a baby, you're feeding a baby from your body, let's not have any more.
Right.
And it can really decrease libido and actually lead to sex being painful because there's dryness, and your vagina can be actually very like fragile and dry during that time while you're breastfeeding, and that can lead to painful sex. And there might be another partner who's really missing that physical connection and is feeling rejected and is feeling really disconnected from you. And so there's just so many reasons why this is something that so many couples and individuals can relate to, but we don't talk enough about it. We are talking more about it, but it's behind closed doors. It's private. It's something that people might feel ashamed of, that they aren't having sex with their partner, right? Or they're not feeling intimate with their partner. And then they open up Instagram and they're scrolling and they see all these other couples that just look so connected and in love with their new baby, and they're comparing their real life to someone else's highlight reel, and that shame just keeps us even more silent, right? And then to even reach out and get support, to reach out to a couples therapist, there's the feeling of, is it going to be awkward to talk about such intimate things with somebody else, to talk about our sex life with somebody else? Whether it's a therapist or a friend, like it can be very uncomfortable. And so a lot of people just suffer and struggle in silence. And then, that postpartum year passes, and years can go by where you just have a hard time finding each other again in those intimate ways. And so it can be such a really painful experience for couples.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it should be one of those things that is talked about, especially for women. You hear about, of course, your labor and your delivery and going home, and kind of you hear a little bit about what it's like as far as the care for your body and the healing process. And especially if you're a first-time mom, adjusting to, breastfeeding or having a child that you're watching over. And then the big shift that you don't really hear that much about as far as preparation, which is what you were saying, is the shift in the dynamic in your relationship. And I think that everybody, when you get pregnant, you kind of have this idea of like, oh, everything's going to go back to normal in the dynamic that you have with your partner. And the reality is that you can still have a beautiful relationship with your partner, but there is another person that you factor into that will wake up in the middle of the night, that requires you, if you're breastfeeding, to be tending to them, especially a lot in the early months. And so a lot of people had written in about the whole guilt factor there, and a lot of women feeling like, what do you do if you feel guilty wanting to prioritize your baby over your spouse, and how do you articulate that? And also prioritizing the fact that like maybe you aren't interested in having sex and feeling the guilt about, because we all hear about like the 6 weeks thing of like, you're cleared after 6 weeks, and after that you're ready to be a sexual being again. But it's, for a lot of women, the 6 weeks part is like, maybe a little bit longer than that. So what would your advice be for people who are wondering about how to kind of balance that guilt factor?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's really important for us to talk about guilt as a human emotion just in general. We as human beings are wired to feel. Our emotions are there to offer data. Anxiety, fear, anger, all of these don't always feel great, but they do serve a purpose and a role. Obviously, sometimes they overstep. But guilt is one of those emotions that we are also wired for. Guilt is there to pop up and let us know when it feels like there's something that's really important to us, or that we value, that we feel like we've gotten out of alignment with in some way, shape, or form. So like, if, this morning my son was like really lagging getting ready, and I snapped at him and immediately felt guilt. And the reason for that was because I value patience, and I want him to, I want to have a good morning with him. I value our connection, our relationship. And when I snap or lose my cool, that doesn't align with those things that I really value and are important to me. So when it comes to this guilt, I imagine that the individuals who reached out to you with those questions, there's something that they value about having that level of connection with their partner, about having intimacy with their partner, about feeling connection in that way that doesn't feel like a thing that they are feeling aligned with in that moment, right? They're not experiencing it. They don't feel ready for it. They're not interested in it, but it's something that is important to them, or was very important to them, or was a really integral ingredient in their partner relationship for a period of time. And or they see that their partner is really missing them in those ways and missing that intimacy, or their partner really values that sort of physical touch connection and they're feeling touched out, but they also love their partner. So guilt pops in to say, hey, here's some data here that there's something that's important to you that you're not experiencing or that you feel out of alignment with. And I think that when we think about guilt in that way, it allows us to not just sort of spiral into it, because sometimes guilt can really spiral into shame. Guilt being the emotion of I've done something wrong or I'm out of alignment with something. Shame being there's something actually deeply wrong with me or with my relationship. And shame has a silencing effect that really keeps people from getting support. So we don't want that to happen. But if we identify, okay, guilt has a role, this is the message that it's offering me. If I create a little bit of space between myself and this emotion to kind of be curious about it, I can identify that these are actually things that are important to me too. And when I can acknowledge that and find a way to communicate from that space to my partner, we might actually see that there are commonalities here. Like you might want more physical intimacy than I'm ready for, but I can at least open up to you about the fact that this is important to me too. I'm just not there yet, but maybe we can find a way to get there together.
I mean, a big part of that, I think, also is not only communication being key, but a lot of people were also asking about the whole idea of scheduling sex with your partner.
Yeah.
Because that, and I know that's something that you also talk about, but the reality is, you know, there's already so much going on with life in general. And then you add a baby on top of it. And then, you know, our worlds have kind of gone back to a new version of normal. People are, you know, out doing things. Life is kind of going back to a new version of normal. So there is a part that you need to kind of figure out, you know, is scheduling sex, is that the way that we're going to go about this? Is that romantic? Is it not romantic? Did you ever think that you would get to a place where you would be needing to have a conversation about when you're going to schedule sex? Like, I think that that's a big part that I think a lot of parents deal with in their relationship. And then it is a big topic that came up with what your recommendation is around the topic of scheduling sex.
Yes, I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, because I think that for some couples, actually scheduling sex is not the right thing. I think that for some couples, if we can say, okay, we actually need to carve out space, and we know that like leading up to sex, we're going to need a day where we don't have the kids, where we are able to relax, we're able to spend alone time with each other, and we're going to create the best environment for intimacy to happen, right? That can be really valuable for some couples. So when we talk about scheduling sex, sometimes it's about creating opportunities for us to actually be alone with each other, that it's even a possibility. But here's the thing. I actually think that in many ways, for some couples, having bad sex is actually worse than having no sex. And let me explain what I mean by that. If somebody let's say somebody had a traumatic birth, and having sex and that sort of physical, vulnerable intimacy actually is triggering to them, that in order for them to get through sex, they actually are getting out of their body and not even present in that moment, right? That actually can be traumatic in and of itself. Is that good for a couple? Is that good for a partner relationship? No. If sex is painful, just getting through it because you feel like this is something that you have to be doing with your partner in order for it to be a healthy relationship, and because it's important, because your partner is desiring sex.
Yeah.
If sex is painful for you, is just scheduling it and checking it off the list and getting it done good for the relationship? No. For couples like that, right? I actually think let's take sex off the table, actually. Like we want to get there, right? But we actually need to do work to support the couple in being ready for that, both partners. And so, that might look like finding ways to experience intimacy with each other that does feel like that meets somebody where they're at. I was working with somebody once who found that she had no interest in sex, very low libido. It was related to her for breastfeeding and body image. And she found though that she did really enjoy when her partner brushed her hair for her. Like it was something that he could do that was connected and it was touch, but it was in a way that felt okay for her where she was at, and meeting somebody where they're at, I think is really, really important. And for couples to have communication about that. I think that a lot of times there's this sort of old model of intimacy and libido and sex and desire and arousal where you imagine that first you're going to have desire, and that's going to lead to arousal, which will then lead to sex. Now, if you're just waiting around for spontaneous desire to pop up when you're postpartum and you're a parent, you might be waiting for a really long time. And so if we actually can rework that model to finding ways to experience arousal to eventually lead to desire, to lead to sex, that's actually going to be a way that we're going to meet people where they're at, I think, more productively. And so a couple talking to each other about finding ways to experience arousal, whether that's through touch, whether that's through actually by taking sex off the table because the pressure of that is actually getting in the way, because it is, somebody's not ready yet. But if I can talk to my partner about what I am interested in terms of feeling connected to them, what it is that I need in order to remove some of those blocks. Like maybe I need some help. I need some support. I need some alone time. Like I need to not be touched by my baby and my children and my dog for a little bit. I need to take a bath. I need to just experience some time alone.
Right.
Maybe the individual actually needs to spend some time with self-exploration to kind of reconnect with their body. Maybe somebody hasn't experienced an orgasm in a year, or longer, right? Months, a year, longer. And so maybe they need to reconnect with their body through self-exploration, through just remembering what it feels like to have that sort of pleasure in your body before they're even ready to communicate what it is that they need to their partner. So I think just the blanket advice of scheduling sex is actually really not taking into consideration the nuance of what so many different couples need, where couples are at, and actually just scheduling it and having bad sex that's painful or that's actually like you're not even connected to your body when it's happening.
Right.
Actually, I think is worse for couples
Yeah.
not having sex at all.
I mean, a couple of the big questions that were submitted several times had a lot to do with painful sex and also with issues with your libido. So I want to kind of touch on both of those parts of it. We've mentioned libido several times and also painful sex. Obviously, I think a lot of women, especially if it's your first time baby and you maybe haven't really watched a ton of videos to prepare you for childbirth. I remember I've said this before, I watched so many videos on childbirth just to get as familiar with the process before having my daughter as I possibly could. And also I talked to a lot of people that I knew had just recently had babies just about the process and knowing and being aware that everyone's childbirth experience is very unique and very different, but also what the healing process was, because I didn't feel like there was a lot of talk about the hormone drop that you experience right after having a baby. That totally caught me off guard. You hear a lot about like having your, your diaper style underwear and making sure that you have witch hazel and all those things, but you don't really hear that much about the hormone aspect of it, or the, emotional, mental, physical, so many different aspects that go into life post baby. But the painful sex part of it, I think, is also a big part, of course, for people who are curious about sex and going back into sex after having a baby, but also just being terrified of like what is even going on down there, and fearful of, okay, the 6 weeks are going to be over, then what? And then on top of that, as you were mentioning, for a lot of women who may be experiencing a change in hormones, and that is a big topic that we've discussed on here before. Not all women's hormones go back to what they were right away. A lot of them take a very long time, and sometimes you need to go back to your doctor to get help with that. But the libido aspect of it, and maybe you could also explain for some people who don't necessarily know that much about it, but having a low libido and maybe not even really being interested. There were a couple people who wrote in, what if I'm not attracted to my husband at all anymore? So I think that it's a big topic, that I want your advice on, because a lot of people wrote in asking about that.
Yeah. So libido, we can kind of think about libido as, having sexual desire, like sexual thoughts, you know, and I think that for a lot of us, maybe in the beginning of our partner relationship, we experience what I kind of described before of just having desire, right? That desire just like spontaneously come. And then from the desire, we experience arousal. And then from that, right, then we're ready, we're game.
Right.
But I think what happens so much with the postpartum experience is there's so many what you can call libido blocks, libido killers that are happening. Um, you just had a baby, like you don't recognize your body anymore, as I mentioned earlier. And if I don't recognize my body, am I going to be comfortable with the vulnerability that sex and intimacy brings with it? Do I want to fully be seen in that way? If I don't even want to look at myself, if I don't recognize myself, and just stay on that for a second. I remember working with a couple once, and the wife shared that this was a heterosexual relationship, and the wife shared that, and the husband looked at her and he was like, "You are more beautiful to me than ever." Like, and they had never she had never even brought it up because of her shame, but for him, she was like she was beautiful, right? Like, yeah. And so I think that oftentimes we don't even want to talk to our partners about what we're feeling, but being able to take the risk of vulnerability, because it does feel like a risk. Vulnerability feels awful sometimes, but like the risk of vulnerability to say, I don't recognize my body. I don't feel comfortable in my body. I don't want you to see me naked. Like I tore down there. Like I don't even want to look. I don't want you to see that. Right. I'm afraid of what it's going to feel like, because actually scar tissue from tearing can be connected to painful sex. There's just so many elements there. But if we take the risk of vulnerability to open up to our partner about those things, whether it's body image, or maybe it's, there were some really intense parts of the birth that I still feel impacted by. And the idea of having my sex organs be penetrated in any way or touched in any way actually feels like that might be really triggering, because right. There was a lot happening during the birth that I felt powerless during, or I felt traumatized by. And if we hold all of that in, right, and we don't take the risk of vulnerability of opening up to someone, whether it's our partner or a professional, then we're going to be stuck in that space, right? That space of shame. And it can lead to just more and more disconnection. Libido is, the desire for sex. And here's often a question that I want to know from somebody. Like, if you start to be intimate with your partner, and like once you get going, you're able to enjoy it, then that's really a really important thing to take note of. And then what we want to do there is identify, well, what are some of the blocks and libido killers that are getting in the way here, for that to be something that you guys are integrating more into your life with each other because you both want that. If somebody is wanting to be intimate or attempting intimacy or sex and they're not enjoying it, it's painful to them, they can't be in their body with that kind of intimacy while it's happening, that's a huge red flag and indicator that more support is needed. Whether that's pelvic floor therapy, like, oh my gosh, people need to know about the pelvic floor and about pelvic floor therapy, physical therapy support. This can be a game changer for so many individuals who just sort of assume that this is just how they have to live the rest of their life, right? Whether it has to do with going pee, going poo.
I feel like there are a lot more conversations around pelvic floor. I posted a video actually last night that I had watched on pelvic floor, but there are a lot more conversations around pelvic floor and the importance of focusing on your pelvic floor after having a baby. I'd never heard of the pelvic floor before I got pregnant. But it is such a big part of sex, and also, being able to have intimacy with your partner and also feel comfortable in your body, because for a lot of women that changes dramatically after having a baby.
Absolutely. And so if you're experiencing painful sex, talking to your provider, pelvic floor, getting a referral for a pelvic floor physical therapist. I know you talk a lot about the pelvic floor. I have a podcast episode with Sarah, the Vagina Whisperer.
So great.
So good. So great. Yeah. And so important, and not something that enough people know about. Or if you're experiencing, if during sex or during intimacy, you find yourself feeling really triggered by just touch, by penetration, by anything related to potentially the birth, right? You experienced a really intense birth. That can be a huge red flag also, that you need support to process your birth experience. Therapy can be a great place for that to happen. I had a traumatic birth with my first, and I did EMDR, had EMDR done on me, which is a really, really powerful, evidence-based approach that really directly targets the trauma and supports somebody in processing it and moving through it. Right. After I experienced it myself, it was such a game changer that I went and did the training myself, because I was like, I need to be able to offer this to the clients I work with too. So if you find yourself having painful sex, or that the idea of that kind of intimacy feels really triggering for you, these can be very big red flags. If somebody feels like, I'm not attracted to my partner anymore, I mean, this is, don't just keep letting that go, right? Like, folks need to get support. And so reaching out for couples therapy can be so important, because that can be a really scary thing to acknowledge for yourself. And it can feel like something, okay, you're talking about taking the risk of vulnerability, opening up to my partner. Gosh, that's not something I feel ready to open up, but that's not something I feel I want to share with them. Right. But maybe if you go to couples therapy, we can find what's actually going on there. Like, what is the disconnect from attraction? If you were attracted before to your partner, like, what has shifted and changed in the dynamic? Is there something happening in the partner relationship that's contributing to that? I think a lot of times one partner might feel like they carry a lot of the physical, mental, emotional load of parenting. And if they feel like they're carrying that load and their partner isn't supporting them in that, I mean, that can absolutely impact how attracted I am going to be to my partner, how much I'm going to want to be close to that person if I don't feel supported to them in those ways. So couples therapy can be huge.
Is there anything that you would recommend to people about increasing libido or increasing sex drive that is, as I mentioned before, the whole topic of just having low libido and having maybe a lack of interest in sex in general post-baby? It was a big topic that was asked about, but would there be anything, I mean, hormones obviously play a huge part of it, but is there a certain time postpartum that women should go to a doctor to get a hormone panel done, or to seek out help that might be, more than just having a conversation, which again, I'm so big on communication. So I'm all for having open communication with your partner. But is there something else that you would recommend to people who maybe are sitting here and saying like, is there anything else I can do or buy or eat or do to help with that?
Oh, I know. Don't you wish that there was just like some sort of magical like thing that like food we could eat and it would, I mean, I guess there are, some foods that people say support that, but I think that we have to look at it like very holistically, right? And
Right.
so I love that you mentioned a bunch of things, and I actually love that because I do think that what you're talking about here is more of a holistic approach to addressing libido challenges. And so I do think it can be so helpful to talk to your provider.
Mhm.
And if your provider is like not supporting you in terms of you're asking questions about hormone imbalances, you're asking about your pelvic floor, and they're kind of poo-pooing that away, they're not addressing that, then find a new provider, right? Like
Yeah.
find somebody who, and it might not be your traditional OBGYN, it might be more of a functional doctor, or a naturopathic doctor that really focuses on hormones and will do that, hormone sort of check for you. Sometimes, seeing a pelvic floor therapist. So I think talking to providers that can address, like you said, the hormone impacts. Also, I think lactation consultants can be really helpful because breastfeeding can definitely play a part in libido. And so if somebody has questions about the impact and the relationship, talking to a lactation consultant can be really helpful. There can also be a lot of things happening when you're weaning, hormonally too. And so just having support professionally from providers can be really helpful. And I think it's important to take those steps because if there's something going on underneath, like physically with your pelvic floor or with scar tissue or with your hormones, you could do all the things that I'll talk about next, and you might still experience pain or struggles with libido, dryness, and pain. And so you want to get those things addressed first. And so tackling that. And then I think there's both the partner piece and then just the individual piece. So sometimes before we can go to our partner and talk about intimacy and explore intimacy and find ways to reclaim that sort of intimate relationship with each other, we've got to explore that within ourselves first. And so that might mean, coming back into your body, self-exploration,
Mhm.
figuring out for yourself what feels good to you so that you can then communicate that to your partner to begin to feel like a sexual being again, to
Right.
experience pleasure, and then being able to go to your partner and communicate what that looks like. And that might not be sex right away. That might just mean, hey, I really enjoy this sort of the way that this sort of soft touch on my arms or on my face or on my scalp or my neck. There was a period of time for my husband and I when I was, postpartum, very postpartum, had no interest in sex, and his love language is touch. And one day he asked if I could step on his back because his back was hurting, and stepping on his back felt really good. And I used to do that, and I was like, sure. And I did that for him, and it made us feel closer because
Yeah.
it was something physical that he wanted, that he asked me for, that I was able to offer to and give to him in a way that at that point, like, gosh, 6 weeks postpartum, like I I was able to give him, and
Yeah.
it felt like a connection. And again, like, is that enough? No, like, but we have to find a way to get there, and meet each other where we're at. And sometimes that takes, getting outside support to address any underlying issues, therapy, doctor visits, hormone checks,
Mhm.
pelvic floor support. And then sometimes that means addressing anything within yourself to even identify what it is that feels good to you and to see yourself as a sexual human being again.
Yeah.
And then to come to your partner and take the risk of vulnerability to communicate what it is you are experiencing, and then to talk to each other about what it is that you're both desiring and how can we find a way to meet each other where we're at.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a big part of just relationships and intimacy in general, when you have a child, if it's your first or your second, it's also just being open to the fact that maybe there are things that are different that might make you feel closer to your partner or might make you feel more attracted to your partner, that can be very different than it was pre having a baby. So whether it's, walking on your partner's back or sitting with your child or seeing your partner sit with your child, like there are a lot of different things that, make you feel closer to your partner that you didn't even think were possible. And then also there's the opposite side of that, maybe there are some things that you thought might make you feel closer to your partner that actually don't. And I think that, was a question that a lot of people had asked, which was just, how do you deal with that? And being open, I think, is also one of the things that you're saying, of being open to new ways of feeling more connected to each other that maybe weren't around before you guys became parents. I also, just out of curiosity, I think I have a lot of friends who've had babies this past year, and there is a part of when I listen, when you talk to your girlfriends and you talk about your relationships and sex life and attraction to your partners, is there a certain point for men, women, whatever kind of relationship that you're in, where you might say like, okay, now it's time to go find someone like yourself to talk about things going on in our relationship that isn't just a girlfriend or close family friends or a sibling, whatever it is, that you talk about those things to, that it's actually time to have a conversation with somebody about these things? Because for a lot of people, I feel really lucky in my relationship. I know it's part of your relationship. Communication is such a big part of it. And we always have open dialogue about everything, which is so huge in a relationship and so helpful. But for a lot of people, that's not as comfortable. So at what point would you recommend to people that like, this is a sign where maybe it would be better to get a professional's help?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Sometimes, we go to our friends and we'll talk about something, and then we feel better about it because we talked about it, right? We kind of talked it out with someone. But sometimes in the therapy world, there's a therapist sort of term we call it triangulation, where sometimes you're bringing in a third party. Maybe there's some, sort of disconnect or anxiety between you and one person in that triangle, say your partner. And so we triangulate somebody else in, maybe a friend. So instead of having to deal with it here, we bring someone else in and we talk about it. And that's not to say it's always bad, right? Like, hey, I love a good girl chat where I can just like decompress and like say the things that like I'm not ready to say to my partner yet, and just to feel like normal, like maybe other people experience this too. And so love that. But sometimes we do that and it decreases the anxiety because we've talked about it. Maybe we feel a little bit more like it's more normalized. But then if that never leads to us actually then talking directly to our partner about it, that can become an issue. So what's cool about therapy and a therapist is it's another triangle. You're triangulating somebody else into that dynamic, but it's a professional who knows how to bring it back to the two of you. Right. And so it might be easier to look at me and say, I don't feel attracted to my husband anymore. It's going to be a lot harder to turn to your partner and say that.
Right.
But what a therapist can do is support you in being able to have conversations and dialogue about the hard things directly with each other, giving you the skills and the tools to communicate effectively with this issue, whatever it might be, and then future issues. The point of therapy, couples therapy, is to work yourself out of needing that couples therapist, right? So a good therapist is going to give you those skills and tools to be able to take into all of the issues that come up in your partner relationship, because there will be more, because that's just what it is to be human. So if a couple finds themselves really having a hard time even broaching topics, or every time they do, they get caught up in these same sort of negative cycles, these same dynamics, pursuer distancer dynamics, or just they find that they have really different communication styles. One partner is a really big external processor, like I want to talk it out. One is like, hold on, wait, I need space before I'm ready. And they're really struggling with these dynamics. All of these can be really great signs that therapy can be a really important step. I always say, don't wait until you're on the brink of divorce. Like therapy can be like going to see your doctor. You're getting a relationship checkup, right?
Yeah.
And I think that too many folks think, well, if we go to couples therapy, it must be because we're on the brink of divorce. Things have to be that bad. No, like don't let it get that bad. Like
Yeah.
go reach out for that support before you get to that point. And it's again, it's bringing somebody else in, but somebody who has the professional skill to support you and your partner to bring it back to the two of you so that you can actually communicate these things with each other.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, we talk about therapy much more openly now, which I think is such an incredible thing as, individual therapy, but also as couples therapy. And before my husband and I got married, part of the Catholic Church was that you meet with somebody that's a therapist to kind of talk things through, go over different topics as part of, premarital counseling. And I thought that it was I think everybody should do it. I mean, everybody should do whatever they want, but it was so helpful to be able to have that as being kind of an entryway into having that kind of open conversation and dialogue with your partner before you're getting married, and then be able to have that space when you are married to talk about things, before you get to a place where people are like, oh, I have to go to couples therapy because you're on the verge of having something terrible happen. And to be able to have that place when things are great and talk about things, to check in on certain topics, have the open dialogue, have the communication, and set that ground in your relationship when things are going really well. Because as you're saying, as life goes on and more children come into play, life changes, your relationship only gets, to be more complicated at certain points, and to be able to have that good structure before and when it's really great is such a huge gift that you're giving to your relationship long term.
And it's such a gift that you could give to your children. I think that a lot of times folks will come to see me, whether it's individuals who are now wanting to process their own childhood trauma or childhood stuff, or couples. A lot of times, the reason I love working with new parents so much is it's a really vulnerable season of life where folks begin to recognize that, gosh, our relationship impacts our children, like how I'm triggered impacts my children. And so a lot of times people will come in because they're like, I don't want to screw up my kids, or I don't want to pass this on to my kids. And I'm like, you know what? Whatever brings you in the door, I'm here for that because you're here. And we can work to get to a place where you recognize that beyond your role as a parent and beyond what's great, what's good for your children, you deserve to feel good too. You deserve to experience healing. You deserve to have a healthy relationship that integrates intimacy if that's important to you and your partner. Like you deserve these things outside of your role as parents. But a lot of times people will come in because they're scared of screwing up their kids. And I think that, postpartum is already such a vulnerable time where like so much of our identity feels like it kind of falls apart, and all the pieces of us are on the floor. And what's so cool is I get a chance to welcome people into my doors and to work with somebody whose pieces are all on the floor and they're feeling really like, torn apart by this transition. And we can begin to put the pieces back. And some of them are going to shift and change. Some of them need, some more nurturing. Some of them are no longer going to fit. But it's such a cool season to do this work. Because of what's already happening. Like you're already kind of primed for change because so much has already been called for change. And so, I think I really recommend folks before baby comes to get support if they can, and to just not wait if they're struggling.
Well, I love this conversation, and I could, I'm sure we'll have to come back and do more because there are so many other questions, of course, that I didn't even get to. But I think that the biggest takeaway, especially just even from me knowing you and following your page, and also following so many different people who are talking about life postpartum, is that all these topics that we're talking about today are very normal, and that while there is a lot of maybe shame and guilt and embarrassment when it comes to the subject of sex in general for a lot of people, but also just relationships and intimacy after having a baby and going through that adjustment in your life, that I think knowing that there are people who are also, feeling that same feeling that you're feeling, and being able to follow people like yourself to help get guidance maybe on your own, and then being able to feel comfortable enough to open up the conversation with your partner to get to a better place with your intimate relationship or your sex life, or having a conversation about how to get there together. And I love that you're so open and that you talk about it so beautifully, and also so in a way that's really non-intimidating and welcoming people in. Because I think for a lot of women, and I see this with a lot of my girlfriends, of just like, what is normal? Like, you know, is this normal? Is that normal? Is it normal to have these feelings? Is it normal to feel very sexual after you have a baby? Like, there are so many different ways that, and you know, you hear about it a lot when you're pregnant, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sexual when you're pregnant. And then there's such a big adjustment after that. So it's different for everyone. Everyone's birth experience is different. Pregnancy experience is different. Parenthood, and also their sex life is different. So I love these conversations that we have, and I know we'll probably have to come back and do another one, which makes me so happy, because I love talking to you, but also it's such a big topic. And I know that you have so much more information on your page if you want to tell anybody about that, and we'll put it all in the caption, of course. But if you want to let anybody know if they have more questions, where to go to for your wisdom.
I love chatting with you, Catherine. I always have so much fun chatting with you. So thank you for having me again.
Of course.
And yeah, it is like my mission in life to take things that might live in like the shadows of our hearts, our minds, our homes, our lives, and like bring those things out of the shadows and like bring them into the light, because then you can begin to see that, wow, maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe I'm not alone in this. Mm-hmm. And maybe now I'm ready to ask for help and support. And so on my page, I talk about all of these shadow things, right, that might be lingering and festering in the shadows. Things like scary thoughts, like scary intrusive thoughts that can happen postpartum, rage and irritability as a mother, and you know, how that can be connected to anxiety and depression. Mm-hmm. Talking about things like, I shared a post the other day about how dogs can be a trigger when you're postpartum. And like how it's just like one more thing that a family member, this thing that you love that needs you, is touching you, wants to be in the bathroom with you, and you're just like, and then you feel the guilt and the shame around that, or they bark when the baby goes to sleep. And so things that like happen in everyday homes, mm-hmm. and our struggles, and that we feel big feelings about, but people don't often talk about, right? Mm-hmm. Sex, your dog being a trigger, scary thoughts, anger, yelling, rage. I want to talk about all these things and support people and recognize that they're not alone. The DMs that I get from folks saying like, I had no idea that this was a thing. Thank you for giving me a name for it, or I took a step to get support. That's everything to me. That's why I do anything that I do here in this space. And so you can follow me over on my page at Dr. Cassidy. I have a podcast called Holding Space, where we have these same topics. We talk about the pelvic floor and intimacy after baby. And I just recorded an episode about dogs meeting your baby and how to navigate that transition.
Oh my God, it's such a big topic.
Yes. And so, you can follow me on my account or subscribe to the podcast for more of these conversations.
Awesome. Well, I highly recommend it. I love all these conversations and how you talk about them and tackle them. So I'm sure we're going to have to come back, because I just also remember that there were so many questions on the whole idea of being touched out. So I want to come back and talk about that more. But thank you so much for today. And oh, my mom, so good that you're talking about this. It's a sea change. Thank you, Mom, for watching. It's so great. Thank you, Dr. Cassidy. We'll come back and do this again soon. And I'm grateful for you taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me, Catherine.
Okay, bye.
Bye.